And I was finally told, oh, your father was, he was in your quartermaster corps attached to Company A, 31st Infantry Regiment, and told me about, he was on the march and he went to Camp O'Donnell and Tayabas, and then he went to Cabanatuan, and he was on this hell ship that took him to Japan, and he survived, he came back, but they didn't know anything about it. So I moved here in February of 2012, and I'm interested in history because my father fought at Bataan. He actually arrived in Bataan in 1936.
What's the name of your father and his rank and his unit?
My father's name was, he was Sergeant Richard C. Hudson, and he was in the Quartermaster Corps, and he was stationed in Intramuros, and his office was in the Santa Lucia Gate in Intramuros. He had an office inside there. And at that point, sometime in 1938, he fell in love with a Filipino, of course. And
runs in the blood.
It runs in the blood. And they had a daughter in 1939, and he, at that time, applied to the U.S. Army for the right to marry her, and he had to get their permission to marry her. Manila was attacked, December 8th, 1941, and he was immediately sent to Bataan. Well, he was on Bataan during the entire defense, and his job with the Quartermaster Corps was to supply food, ammunition, clothing. He had to supply anything a soldier needs to fight a war, and that was his job, driving back and forth. And he told me more than once that the closest he ever came to being killed was by his own troops, because there was
friendly fire.
Well, see, he was supplying food to a certain 31st Infantry Regiment, which was U.S. Army, and driving a truck to drive the food, he was stopped by other groups from different
units.
Different units, and they hadn't eaten 2 or 3 days, and they said, we're gonna, you could drop some food off for us, or
we'll shoot you,
and we're gonna take it. So
it's just not friendly fire.
So that's he came very close to dying that way. There is a rumor,
I'm listening,
of course, that Bataan surrendered, but there was really no surrender.
What?
Huh?
There was an attempt to surrender by General King, who commanded the forces in Bataan.
General King surrendered to the Japanese.
You're partially right. He attempted to surrender, but the Japanese did not want a piecemeal surrender of the Philippines.
Well, that's understandable, because the same thing happened in Europe, because General Eisenhower didn't want a piecemeal surrender of various German units, so it had to be all until it finalized in Reims. Anyway, going back to that in Bataan.
So when General King met with the Japanese, they said, who are you? And he said, I'm General King. And they said, well, where's General Wainwright? He said, I have no communication with him. He's on Corregidor. And they said, well, we want to talk to Wainwright. And he said, I'm sorry, I have no communication. I'm here to surrender Bataan. They asked for his sword, which he had left in Manila when the war started, so he didn't have it. And he asked for good treatment of his men, and the Japanese said, well, we are not barbarians. No acceptance of his surrender. He kept asking for terms, and they said, if you surrender unconditionally. And if you are actually, in actuality, surrendering yourself and your staff here, each soldier of the 80,000 that when Bataan fell, there were 80,000 men. The Japanese considered each soldier to have surrendered individually.
Oh.
So they were not considered prisoners of war; they were considered captives. Unfortunately, there's a school in Bolonga, which used to be General Homa. General Homa was the commanding general of the Japanese forces in Bataan, and that was his headquarters at this school in Bolonga. And there's a table there, and I'm sure you've heard of it. The Americans on one side, General King and his staff.
I have a picture of that.
Okay, and the Japanese. When General King tried to surrender and failed in Lamau, this is just 5 or 6 kilometers south of where we sit right now. Those failed, and General King and his staff were taken to the Bolonga school, and they sat at the table and they were interrogated. He was on the march. He started on March the 10th, and I think he arrived in Camp O'Donnell on the 24th, but he got stopped somewhere and he had to work on a detail for 2 or 3 days. But he was in Camp O'Donnell for about a month, and then he volunteered to get the heck out of O'Donnell because hundreds were dying every day. And
he volunteered for what?
He volunteered for a road detail in the province of Tayabas.
Quezon. I believe it's Quezon because I live there, near there, sorry.
So he went there with 299 other men, and after about 8 weeks, half of them had died.
So he was in that famous camp in POW camp in Cabanatuan where the Great Raid happened, but he was transferred from there to Japan, like any other well-bodied Americans and other Europeans, to work in Japan.
He was shipped out 6 months before the Great Raid. So he was liberated in September 1945 after the atomic bomb was dropped. And he came back to Manila, and he went to his fiance's parents' house. That's where he thought he'd find her, only to find out that she had been raped and murdered by the Japanese while he was a POW. And his daughter had been thrown into an orphanage. And one thing my father taught me was that 80% of the defense forces on Bataan were Filipinos.
Yes.
Only 20% were Americans.
Correct.
So it was the Filipinos that were doing most of the fighting and most of the dying on Bataan. And he had great respect for Filipinos. He saw so many acts of heroics. And
like I said, my father fought in Bataan, and like your father, both our fathers rather, were fortunate to survive World War II.
He referred to Filipinos as his brothers. What I do know is that about 78 to 80,000 Filipinos and Americans began the death march. There's no exact numbers. There was nobody there writing everybody's name down, so nobody's name was written down. Where we do start getting some firm numbers is when they arrived at Camp O'Donnell. Now, Camp O'Donnell was split in two. Capas, where Capas National Shrine is now, was the Filipino side of Camp O'Donnell. On the other side of the street was the American side, but that's all built up now. There's residential homes, and so that part is gone. A lot of them disappeared during the death march. And there's
on the way.
There's no firm numbers. Some people say 7,000 to 10,000 Filipinos died on the death march, and about 600 Americans. But after researching and speaking with other well-known researchers, we're thinking maybe less than 300 Americans died on the death march.
From my father, which I need to verify with my cousins, like I said, when he was in Dinalupihan, my future uncle just took him out.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you think about it, since it was so easy to disappear, obviously a 6-foot red-haired American, or blonde.
Yes.
You
Yes.
can't exactly blend in
You
with
cannot hide.
the locals,
Yes.
So some of them did escape. If there was a commotion, they'd jump over a bridge into the water or whatever. Some Americans escaped, became guerrillas. And usually, pretty much everybody escaped from the death march, became guerrillas. So it's hard to believe that 13,000 Filipinos died on the march, or 10,000. It's probably closer to 5.
And there was a time that the Japanese even stopped their offensive because they had no more troops anymore
They stopped for about 6 weeks because they had to have troops come in
from Shanghai
Shanghai or Singapore or
or
someplace
Taiwan
like
or
that.
Formosa.
Somewhere else, yeah. Plus more artillery.
Yes.
It's just amazing to me that Singapore fell, Hong Kong fell, Malaysia fell. All these different countries, the armies were falling like dominoes everywhere except for one place,
The Philippines.
and that's why they chose Bataan to defend the Philippines, and Corregidor, which blocked the entrance of the warships.
Manila Bay.
He found out that his daughter was taken to there's an orphanage
In Manila.
in Manila, and it's an island.
Yeah, in
the
an island just
Pacific.
off the bridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was taken there, so he went there, found out who had adopted her, called the people who adopted her. A Filipino doctor had adopted her. He got a chance to meet his daughter, but he wasn't introduced as her father. He was introduced as her uncle, her mother's brother. So he got to meet her, and they were wealthy. So the day before he died, he called me to his bed. He was in a veterans hospital, and he said, "Promise me you'll find my daughter, find your sister." Well, I live in the U.S., and he had lost touch with the family that raised his daughter.
And
in
all you had is that
1960.
picture.
Yeah, so all I had was a picture.
Do you have a name? Did you have a name during the time?
Well, yeah, but they changed her name when they adopted her. He had named her Angela.
Oh.
But when they adopted her, they changed her name to Leonida. So, I didn't know how to find her. I wrote newspapers in Manila, told them my story, please help me find, this was her name, but nothing came of that. Later that year, November 2012, I got an email from somebody in Parañaque. They said, "Mr. Hudson, I was researching my grandfather. He was the man who had adopted my mother when she was a baby from the Hospicio de San Jose."
Yeah, that's
Now
official.
I
Yeah, correct.
remember it. And your blog came up, and I thought, why is this American's blog? Why is my grandfather's name in his blog? So he looked at my blog, and he saw the picture of his mother when she was 7 years old, and he said, "That's my mother when she was." He said, I just found my uncle, and he lives in the Philippines now, and his father was my real grandfather. So it turns out my sister grew up. She had 6 children, 3 girls and 3 boys from 2 husbands. One husband passed away, but my sister died in 1999 from cancer. So I was taken to her grave, and I put flowers on her grave, and that's the closest I got to her. It was about 6 feet, and it was probably, just speaking about it now makes my voice want to crack, but that was one of the most emotional points in my life.
Okay.
Because for 24 years I looked for her, and I remember staring at that picture of that little girl next to my father's bed for almost all my life. And I know how important she was to him. So but at least I had fulfilled my promise to my father to find her.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hudson. May I shake your hand?
Oh, thank you for coming and finding me interesting enough to interview. I appreciate that.
Very much, very, very much. So once again, this from World at War Philippines. Thank you for watching this episode and our future episodes as well. Thank you.